I will say it is called a bus network redesign. It is also a plan to grow and improve bus service. Full stop. This is not rearranging the currently budgeted resources we have in different ways. I think other cities have found that that's pretty politically difficult. This is a plan to grow bus service by 25%. And that has allowed us to move beyond a lot of our constraints in the present day.
Welcome back to Spilling the Tea, where we dive deep into the inner workings of the MBTA. I'm your host, Andrew Cassidy of the MBTA's Customer and Employee Experience Department. And today we have a very special guest, Justin Antos, the Senior Director of Bus Transformation at the MBTA. In today's episode, we'll explore the groundbreaking Bus Network Redesign, a major initiative that promises to reshape bus services across Greater Boston. We'll discuss the vision, the challenges, and the innovative strategies that are being implemented to create a more efficient and reliable bus network. Justin brings a wealth of knowledge and keen insights into public transit dynamics. Through the work of his team and others, the MBTA is working to adapt bus services to better match the evolving needs of the communities they serve. This transformation is all about increasing frequency, improving reliability, and ensuring that the network is more accessible than ever before. So get ready to learn about the transformative changes happening on our streets and how these efforts aim to enhance your daily commute. Justin, thank you so much for taking the time to be here with us today.
Of course.
So I guess before we start diving into the subject matter, could you tell us about your role here at the MBTA?
Sure. So my official title is the Senior Director of Bus Transformation. I like to describe it as envisioning what a better bus network can be and should be, and advancing work and doing things to move us towards that and celebrating our successes in doing it and acknowledging our mistakes when we don't. I oversee two teams directly at the T. One is in charge of implementing what we're calling the Bus Network Redesign, and the other is a team of engineers and city planners who manage our bus priority program, so bus lanes and signal priority. I would say that I generally try to speak for everything that the MBTA is doing that makes the bus better. So that we call that sort of collection of activities, the Better Bus Project. But that includes a bunch of folks that aren't in my department or just sort of in my orbit, spread across other departments here at the T.
Fundamentally, what is bus service to the Greater Boston region?
Number one, I'd say it is a powerful complement to rail. I like to remind folks that the bus system has just about the same number of riders on it as all four subway lines combined.
Wow.
A single project, a bus corridor like Blue Hill Avenue, a 4-mile stretch of that road, is carrying as many riders almost as the entire Blue Line. It's a powerful complement to rail. A lot of the goal of Bus Network Redesign to achieve that is to essentially, as best you can across Boston streets, create a grid, a network by which you can make almost any connection and reach anywhere in the city with the transfer. But more strategically, bus can go where rail isn't or can't quickly, or even where rail was historically omitted for any number of reasons. And we can quickly deploy bus resources to provide mobility to people who need it in places where nothing else is quickly implementable. And then we can build up incrementally from there. We can start not just with a bus stop, but we can build up to a signal priority or a queue jump. We can add a bus lane, and we can start incrementally moving ourselves towards a rail-like quality of service and capacity, like a bus rapid transit. I think a good example of that is the Silver Line, where, in some places it acts more like a bus, and in some places it acts more like a train. And we can step up the bus quickly and provide mobility where it can take years to do so with rail transit. And fundamentally, that means we can help folks get to where they need to be to live their life and to give them opportunity. That's what the essence of all of this is, like all mobility. And the bus is just a versatile and fast way to do it.
So you mentioned Better Bus Project, and we have Bus Network Redesign. There's a lot of bus-centric titles of projects and things. Can you give us kind of just a rundown as to what each one is and what they're not, I suppose?
Sure. I mean, it's great that the MBTA has so many great teams doing things to make the bus better. So the Better Bus Project is just an umbrella term to hold all of them together in one place and to make sure that they're all marching in the same direction and are coordinated. But the major components of it are probably the same things that you'd care about as a rider. Number one is that the bus shows up frequently and it goes where you want to, when you want to go. And our answer for that is really the bus network redesign and service planning. So we're putting the buses in the places where the riders need them. The second is that your bus stop works for you, right? You know where to find it. You know how to figure out what buses are coming to that stop. And so there's a number of groups here at the T who are making bus stops better, either making them more accessible to riders with disabilities, making the signage better, adding real-time passenger information, like how many minutes till my next bus. And then another major component of the Better Bus project is fleet electrification. So we're moving to electric technology, battery electric buses, and getting away from fossil fuels in our bus fleet. So that is a whole effort to, one, replace the technology in the bus itself, but two, to modernize and electrify our bus maintenance facilities. Because if battery electric bus has to be charged somewhere, and that does involve a pretty major change to the way you store and maintain buses. So I'd sort of put those in the three major categories, right? One is sort of planning and routes. And the second one is your stop works for you. And the third is that your bus is powered by a sort of a clean and all electric source of power. The last one, major sort of bucket of work in the Better Bus project, is sort of internal processes and people. So in that category, I would include all of our efforts to hire more bus operators, to make the job of a bus operator more attractive and more pleasant. So anything we can do to improve the schedules or the quality of the work environment for bus operators.
So with Bus Network Redesign being a significant piece of the Better Bus project, what prompted it? What was the moment where the MBTA said, hey, maybe we should rethink our system?
Yeah, it actually began back in about 2018, 2019, before I arrived here, with some market evaluation and analysis of what the current bus system is all about, and where it was succeeding and where it was not succeeding. And in 2018, that evaluation essentially found that the bus system was powerful. It was serving a ton of riders, 400,000 riders a day before COVID, which I'll note is, on par with the ridership of the subway system. That evaluation basically found that there were some problems. A lot of routes sort of duplicated one another, or it was confusing to tell which variation of a route was best for you. A route that ran on weekdays but not on weekends. Some routes began too late or ended too early to really work for people. And mostly that there were some service problems on the street that the evaluation found could be fixed with better changes to the street and the operating environment. And that the bus network hadn't changed. In like 20 years, we'd had like a couple of new routes added here and there. And most of the other changes to the service had been fairly minor around the edges. In 20 years, a city can change a lot. Whole new areas can open up for development. Absolutely. So one of the great things about buses is that you can move them around. It's a lot less permanent than rail subway tunnels. So we felt we had a good opportunity to rethink the bus network from the ground up. And that's where the Bus Network Redesign got started.
In the process of trying to figure out how best to meet the needs of the current ridership of a Boston metro region 20 years removed from when all of this was done, I know there was a significant effort that involved getting feedback from the bus riders themselves. What kind of information were you getting? How are you getting this information? And how has that feedback beyond the data served to inform the pending redesign?
We've had a lot of public feedback on the network redesign stretching over about 4 years. The network redesign is a product of some data analysis, but also a ton of meetings, a ton of public meetings, a lot of events at bus stops, at busways. In the summer of 2022, when we first put out a fully fleshed out proposal for a redesigned bus network, in the ensuing 4 months, I think we had over 200 meetings, and we took on 20,000 public comments and briefed over 50 elected officials. The numbers are here in our final report, but there was a lot of public feedback there. And then we did end up changing the plan a fair amount based on public feedback. Some of those changes were basically in response to folks telling us they really didn't like the proposal at all. And please rewind it, put it back to the way it was. Some of it was, in many situations, we had proposed taking away front door access, meaning a bus would sort of take a small detour to really get to the front door of a building or a mall. We proposed taking that away, and folks really kind of said, that doesn't make sense. We value that for a reason that you can't see in your data. So we sort of tried to take all that to heart. There were some trade-offs though. I mean, you can't, 20,000 public comments, it's impossible to please everyone. And some comments, directly contradicted each other. So we had to make some trade-offs. That's sort of fundamental to the network redesign, is like trade-offs like, would you rather have fewer routes that operate more frequently? Or would you rather sort of spread out that service and have more routes covering more neighborhoods, but it operates less frequently? Would you like to have more one-seat rides that are really sort of customized routes for folks to really just take one bus route? Or if you're willing to transfer, we could increase the frequency and kind of create a mesh network, more like a bus network in a different city, for example.
I think that's an important thing to note as well, because there are a finite number of buses and bus operators. So when you're making these decisions, you really need to understand, when you take from one area, you might be affecting a different person or a different route or something like that. So it's a very complex thing. And that 20,000 number, I think it's great that so many people felt passionately enough to voice their thoughts, opinions, and concerns to be able to imprint that into the updated bus network. So, once everything is rolled out, how will you continue to, monitor, listen, and maybe make decisions based off of rider feedback?
Good question. We are fairly certain we will make a mistake or two in this, and we will need to adjust. So starting from day 0 up until about, the next rating, when we can really change schedules as well, we are basically on standby to adjust the plan based on anything that's going wrong or feedback that we're hearing in the field through all of our normal comment processes. The service planning team is sort of ready to adjust the schedules if we get something wrong, like it's taking too long for the bus to get to this new, route terminal. We really need to increase the run times, or we need a little bit more buffer time at the end because congestion is creating too much unreliability, or folks aren't getting the message. We need to go, provide some sort of alternate service for them, sort of day one issues. But yes, we are ready to take on public comment for sure, and feedback from our own operations when we start launching some of these new routes.
So speaking of operations, what is the involvement with operations themselves / bus operators? How are they involved either in the design themselves, or what are the plans for, training once this kind of new model is rolled out?
We call it Inreach rather than outreach. That's just a word that our department uses when we're dealing with external. We did Inreach to our own bus operators was just as important as the outreach to the public. Without bus operators, we have no bus network. So they go hand in hand. So we were actually out at all garages over the course of last summer at the same time we were taking on those 20,000 public comments, logging and going route by route, turn by turn with bus operators in the garage lobbies, hearing their feedback. The number 1 and number 2 pieces of feedback we heard from bus operators was, these routes are too long, and where am I going to go to the bathroom? Which is a totally fair comment and something we are very much taking to heart and trying to improve operator restroom access, especially as we extend to areas that really don't have good restroom access either today or in the future.
I love the term Inreach, and I'm happy to hear that because, obviously you or I, or maybe not you, maybe I could look at a map and say, yeah, the bus could go this way. But, the bus operators have that institutional knowledge where they're like, oh no, a 60-foot bus isn't going to make that turn or something to that effect. Or, okay, I can go there, but then I'm going to be stuck on a one-way or whatever it is. But that's great to hear.
Yeah, they really are the single best source for all the details you can never see from a system perspective, from a planning perspective. Some of the stories we heard were the overhang over this Market Basket parking lot is low enough that it can sometimes threaten to strike the top of a bus. So we need to swing out around this overhang. It's the kind of detail that only the operations knows, and we've got to hear about
Google Maps.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And as far as the redesigning process, I know that beyond obviously improving service, there have been considerable considerations for equity and accessibility. So what steps are being taken to ensure these principles are maintained throughout the process?
Yes, equity was the single most important driver of the network redesign. And in a lot of the data analysis, guiding us to where we had unmet need or where we should be increasing service or concentrating service into frequent routes, we weighted more heavily equity populations, either in census data or cell phone data, and basically said it's more important for us to serve these customers than it is others. We also included in that term, not just, sort of low income and racial minorities, but we included seniors, persons with disabilities, and other categories like that. So that was absolutely fundamental to the design of the new network that we propose. We are following those exact same principles in the implementation phase. So for example, we are choosing the first 5 routes to implement coming up in phase 1 using the exact same criteria because those routes serve equity populations and they follow the original goals of the project.
So speaking of those communities, what key changes are coming with phase 1? What can riders expect? This is December of this year that this is rolling out?
Yes, we are aiming to launch the first 5 routes of Bus Network Redesign. We're calling it phase 1 in December of 2024. So just at the tail end of this year. Those routes will introduce 4 new frequent routes to sort of Malden, Chelsea, Everett, Revere on the north side. If you look at a map today of where frequent bus routes are, and by frequent, I mean a bus that's scheduled to arrive every 15 minutes or better all day, every day. So 18 hours a day, 7 days a week. There's really not that many on the north side of the network. Got the 111, a couple others. So introducing 4 new frequent routes to the north side in the 116, the new 109, the 110, and the 104. So we really hope that those new routes will sort of showcase what we mean by adding frequent service to an area that doesn't have it now. By adding crosstown connections, a couple of the routes will really go in between rail lines. So connect you, say, from the blue line at Airport over to Sullivan or Malden on the orange line in a way that a rail line can't do today. So we're hoping that those really showcase some of our goals of the project, along with some of the other sometimes overlooked goals of the project, which is simplification. A good example of that is today there is a Route 116 and there's a Route 117. And for 75% of the route travels from Maverick Square in East Boston along the exact same route. And most riders will take either the 116 or the 117 because both routes get them to where they need to be. But it is confusing that we call them 2 different bus numbers and we dispatch them as 2 separate bus routes when for the most part, for the customer, they're the exact same bus. So what we're going to try to do here is combine the 116 and the 117, have it follow one single service pattern. So all you have to worry about is one route and not have to sort of understand the schedules well enough to know that you could take whichever comes first.
And I can see there's a lot of value in that too, because I think for those who don't use the bus, there's a little bit more involved than, just showing up at a subway platform and waiting for a train to come. Same thing kind of with commuter rail, where you have a scheduled life and you have to know what line and what route and where they go and all these other pieces. So anything that can simplify that process, I think takes away a little bit of the fear factor and hopefully encourages more people to utilize bus service that they probably could be using right now, but maybe they're just a little bit of trepidation there and actually putting those feet on the bus.
Yeah, we've definitely seen that in customer outreach and focus groups, et cetera. Folks maybe just don't really know how the bus works, or, if you get on this bus and it says a destination that you don't really know where that is, does that mean it's going to go to your house or where you need to get to? There's definitely a legibility and a simplification challenge there that we're trying to address through some of the service changes.
Now, with Bus Network Redesign adding more frequent bus routes, what kind of changes can commuters as a whole expect? Like, what kind of positive benefit can they expect? There's plenty of complaints. Again, I work on the social side of things, so I see many of them, but, delays, overcrowding, infrequent service, things of that nature. We see that on the daily, unfortunately. So, now we have something that'll help fix this. We have something that we're working on. What is that lived experience like for a rider once this rolls out?
Yeah, I can imagine you get a few comments. As a bus rider myself, I certainly have lived that experience as well. Of, waiting 20 minutes for a bus that's supposed to be there every 10 and then 2 show up. It's a very common problem. So first and foremost, phase 1 of Bus Network Redesign is just more service.
Yep.
It's a 60% increase over those 5 routes where they are now to where they will be in the future.
That's massive.
Yeah. So you just see a lot more buses a lot more frequently. Most of that service increase is outside of peak time. Riders are going to feel that in the middle of the day, in the evenings, and on the weekends. Again, one of the goals of the project is to provide just the bus is always there. It's all day, it's frequent, and it's all the time. So you don't have to worry about whether it stopped running at 8 o'clock or after 7 p.m. it only comes once an hour. It's sort of always there. So you'll see a lot more buses out there, especially on the sort of Chelsea, Everett, Revere, Malden area, and stretching into Cambridge, Somerville, and East Boston, by the way. you'll see some new connections. The 109, which exists today, terminates at Sullivan Square. We will start running that 109 straight through Sullivan Square into Union Square and onto Harvard Square. So you'll get a lot of new connections there from folks up in Everett. Will be able to get to the Red Line, for example, on one single bus, or get to a job in Harvard Square. You'll also see something that's absolutely critical to a lot of and behind a lot of the complaints that you get in social is some help for reliability for some capital supports on the street. So a big part of Bus Network Redesign is not just the service changes, but also changing our streets and our busways and our parking spaces and our bus stops to be ready for more service and to enable more reliable service. So bus lanes, transit signal priority. The transit signal priority is where the bus will actually communicate via software with the traffic signal software. And the traffic signal will be able to respond to the presence or imminent arrival of a bus to say, hold a green light a few more seconds so that the bus can make it through more reliably. And a bus lane, of course, helps keep our buses out of the impact of congestion through congested areas so we can serve a place that a lot of people want to get to reliably. And so the bus isn't bunched further down the line and then they're tweeting at you.
It's all right. That's why we have the corresponding TikTok videos on both transit signal priority and bus lanes. Awesome. So definitely check those out. But on the topic of those infrastructure improvements, I think some people have called it even like phase 0. But can you tell us a little bit about, I guess, the physical components that are being changed right now? I know there's sign changes. And if you could maybe delve in a little deeper to the bus lanes and TSP and all those things.
Sure. Let me start with the signs. We are right now surveying all 6,800 bus stops in the MBTA bus network to understand whether they're in the right place, where our software thinks they are is where they actually are, and where the data that we put out to Google and Apple and all the apps is accurate and reflects what's actually on the sidewalk, and their signage condition and any damage, any presence of a bench or a shelter or a sign, and trying to fix all the problems as we go along. So that's what we're sort of calling phase 0 because it's foundational good housekeeping, better bus project work. Yeah. It's not critical to the network redesign, but we've got a lot of signs out there that still indicate buses that have been discontinued since the start of COVID and really don't exist anymore. Bus network redesign kind of formalized that they will not be coming back. And in fact, the vision for the future network is this. So we're out there right now just kind of updating signs and bringing them up to a state of good repair so that the signs show what buses are actually serving that stop so that nobody's waiting or misled.
And the signs themselves are different, right? They're larger and higher contrast or something like that?
Yeah. So because bus network redesign will require essentially touching or changing or improving every single bus stop sign out in the network, we thought this would be a great time to maybe double check to be sure that this is the exact right design for us. And we had a bunch of folks look at it. We heard from outside customers and outside advocacy groups to basically say, like, some of the signs are too small, hard to read. It's not ADA accessible. They don't technically meet the size requirements or the font requirements for the Americans with Disabilities Act. And so our in-house designer actually came up with a new sign that's just 2 inches wider and kind of looks like the old sign, with a few differences, but mainly it's just everything on the sign is bigger and easier to read. And then we also figured we'd put the same sign on the back. Right now, all of our bus stop signs are one-sided, so you can only see that it is a bus stop and what bus is coming to that if you happen to be on one side of the street and not the other. So we're making them double-sided. And the last thing we're trying is we're adding a little icon to denote routes that are frequent. Again, that definition is every 15 minutes or better all day, every day. So that hopefully riders can understand that this is one that I don't have to check the schedule for.
As long as I have 15 minutes, there will be a bus.
Right. Nice. Scheduled anyways. Yeah, that's the idea. So those signs are actually out now in the wild at, I think, 10 locations. And we've got a few little pop-up events kind of asking folks to fill out a survey, tell us what you think. Again, before we go and make 7,000 of these, let's start with 10 and make sure that we like the design.
What were the other kind of projects or physical infrastructure changes that supplement Better Bus Project / Bus Network Redesign?
So the signage is probably one of the easier ones, right? It's one of the more straightforward ones, which also means we should get it right. But other treatments and capital projects, collaborations, honestly, with our municipal partners, the cities and towns, include things that are probably less visible to customers, but are super important for bus operations, like berthing and layover. And that's a fancy word for basically where do you park the bus at the end? And is the bus stop big enough so that if two buses arrive at the same time, can they both berth? Meaning, can they both get to the curb and open their doors at the same time rather than sort of one having to wait for the other, or worse yet, opening the doors in the middle of the street? We're focused a lot on berthing and layover. Again, if you want to have a lot more service, like I said, 60% more service, there's a good chance you're going to need more space at the end to park the buses and let the bus operators stretch their legs, go to the bathroom, what have you. Other things we're worried about are circulation in busways. So we're looking at some small busway widening project at Wonderland, for example. And then the second to last one I'll say is bus operator restrooms. We have a bunch of places now in the system, and will be more in the future, where we expect there to be a lot of bus operator activity, a lot of bus layovers, where the bus operators have been sort of going for too long before they have a chance to go to the bathroom again at a rail station. And our office is planning to construct new operator restrooms in some of these more remote locations to help bus operators sort of have better working conditions. They're human beings too, just like you and I are, just like the customers are.
So you mentioned working with municipal partners. And in my mind, I'm thinking about, bus lanes where they're awesome. It's always great to be in a bus and passing traffic. But, a lot of these routes, they stretch multiple cities and towns and municipalities. And I assume that's probably a little bit more of a difficult task. Obviously working with municipality is in and of itself, something that you have to contend with. But then when you're dealing with multiples, how does that factor in?
It's a really good point. And you're right. I forgot the most important one and the most ambitious one and the most complicated one, which is capital supports for bus operations, is bus lanes and transit signal priority. What I liken it to is on the rail system, for example, what's just as important to reliable subway service, in addition to a reliable rail car, are the tracks and the tunnel and the train control system. For a bus, it's just as important to have a working bus and well-maintained bus. But we also need its operating environment, which we don't own. And it's not just a subway tunnel just for buses. It's a city street. That operating environment needs to be as favorable for the bus as it is for the tracks are for rail cars. So because the MBTA usually doesn't, 90% of the time doesn't own the city street, we are collaborating with our municipal partners each and every time we try to change a street to be better for bus operations. Thankfully, we have a lot of really great collaborators, especially on the sort of phase one routes. But we've got a whole bus priority team dedicated to implementing more bus lanes and transit signal priority. Queue jumps are another fun one where the bus sort of can cut the line at a red light. And they are pursuing what we're calling our transit priority vision, which we adopted through the board last year. But that's basically a map of where the T wants bus priority. It's about 60 lane miles or so, and it's an ambitious plan. We have about 40 in the ground today, so it's not wildly optimistic, but it is pretty aggressive. But it covers about 15% of our network, but actually impacts about 80% of our riders. So it's really the sort of the highest priority locations where we want a bus lane, and where we think it'll meet the future demand of the network redesign. So for phase one, we have a couple of these projects underway to support those first 5 routes, and we'll have more details about that soon.
Looking forward to it. And I guess, since we are looking ahead, what can we as riders expect in the future for phases of redesign? What are the next phases that we should be on the lookout for? And I guess what kind of changes can we expect to feel? Any areas of service that will see significant changes or anything to that effect?
Yeah, over the course of the network redesign, there are probably a handful of locations that will really see a lot more service. And again, that's sort of recognizing the goals of the project was to, hey, the city has changed. A place like the Seaport has kind of emerged and grown pretty rapidly. The Longwood Medical Area, Kendall Square, places like that, where there's really a lot of jobs and not that much transit usage, where we really feel like that's an underserved market. So you will see us starting to concentrate and reroute more service into places like those. In the immediate term, phase 2 of the network redesign, which we're hoping, fingers crossed, pending we keep our bus operators coming in the door and retaining them, will occur in 2025. And that will target sort of the next round of buses that serve Roxbury, Dorchester, and Mattapan in the city of Boston. And as we, of course, target the routes that serve those neighborhoods, they also connect to other neighborhoods around. So we'll end up kind of looping in Alston, Brighton, and South Boston, and JP, et cetera, et cetera. After that, our phasing plan is basically TBD. We don't quite know yet, but our plan is to alternate between the north side and the south side. Every time we change service and introduce some of these new sort of on-street supports, you will see from our office and from the T including probably from your team as well, a lot of public information about what's changing, what customers need to know. If it's something as simple as just your bus is staying exactly the same as just coming more often, or you'll now have service on Saturday where you didn't, before, to something more complicated, like your bus is now, it has a slightly different number and you may need to transfer at Harvard Square, for example.
So there is a potential for adaptation and what have you down the road as you continue to observe, I guess, the changes, especially after the 2025 rollout, I think you said, that we're just going to kind of continue to assess what's going on.
Definitely. I mean, like I said, the T has not made sort of significant changes to the bus network in a long time. And so we'll learn. My team will learn. The agency will learn as we go and as we sort of figure out how to change bus service around here. And as we change the service, we're also improving a lot of stuff as we go.
Now, we're going to go well into the theoretical, or maybe you have this vision, but how do you anticipate the effects of bus network redesign impacting urban travel patterns, traffic, and city planning? What are the long-term, high-level implications of the work that you and your team are doing?
I guess I'll answer that in two ways. One, I think that the redesign is largely a response to changing traffic plans and traffic patterns that have already happened. And we're sort of just bringing the network up to date to kind of match the reality of things that have already changed. But I guess looking more to the future, what is so strategically powerful about having this plan on the books and adopted by the board and having a team implementing it is that the T is now able to put forth a longer term vision of what the bus network should be when it grows up. And that helps guide our planning processes with, the development of a parcel here and there. Municipal partners plan to put a roadway diet in place or reinvest in a highway or knock down, McGrath O'Brien Highway, that kind of thing. So it does give us a much stronger hand to play in sort of long-term city planning, and it gives us a backstop for our planners out there planning for the future.
I anticipate you can help fix the congestion problems in and around the city as well. If you can make the bus network that much more attractive, where more people are ditching their cars and opting for public transit.
I mean, that's the goal, right? I mean, fleet electrification is one great way to, reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Another great way to reduce greenhouse gas emissions is just to get folks out of their cars and mode shift. The transit system is there for them now. That's one of the best places we can start. So that's the idea.
So I know Boston's not the first city to go through a bus network redesign / better bus project. I think I saw something of a similar moniker down in Miami while I was down there. But now that you've kind of been through the process, and I know you're still mid-process, but now that you've kind of gone through at least some of the motions, what advice would you have for other cities looking to do something similar?
It's true. We haven't quite even delivered on phase one yet of this project, so I'm sure I have a lot to learn. But it has been a popular trend in the industry, which is to redesign. I'd say bus network redesigns have been anywhere from fundamental rethinkings and truly a shakeup to really sort of less aggressive kind of, state of good repair, good housekeeping kind of work. Advice, I think one ingredient for success of this plan has been we've got a pretty strong coalition and a regional coalition behind it. The planning process, the robust planning process, and the customer engagement process, engagement with, elected officials, et cetera, really helped keep the coalition strong. And that's not to say that everyone loves this project. There are some elements of this project that have objectors. But the other thing that's helped is that this is a plan for growth. This is not rearranging the currently budgeted resources we have in different ways. I think other cities have found that that's pretty politically difficult. This is a plan to grow bus service by 25%. And that has allowed us to move beyond a lot of our constraints in the present day. And I will say it is called a bus network redesign. It is also a plan to grow and improve bus service, full stop. And we'll redesign service, but we'll also improve and make the bus better as we go.
It's smart to be thinking that level. Again, not just taking the same pieces and shuffling them around, but really looking, hey, what can we do to make it better? But also let's expand it. That's great to hear. For riders, fellow bus riders who want to stay informed, who want to share their feedback now and as the process unfolds, what's the best way for them to do that?
Better Bus Project section of MBTA.com for sure. We've recently given that whole section, including the Bus Network Redesign section, a shakeup, and you'll see a bunch of updates on there. We've got a pretty active mailing list where we send out announcements, big and small, stuff we're proud of that might not seem to a rider like much, but including some other stuff that is much more impactful as well. So that's the best way to stay in touch. But that said, if your bus service is changing this winter, we will be hard to ignore. You will definitely hear from us sort of at the bus stops, along the route, out in your community, in your language, where you are, and trying to get information to you about what's changing and why.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Justin. Really appreciate you taking the time.
Happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
As we wrap up another insightful episode of Spilling the Tea, I want to thank our guest, Justin Antos, for joining us today and sharing his expertise on the Bus Network Redesign. It's clear that these changes are not just about improving routes and schedules, they're about building a stronger, more connected community. To our listeners, thank you for tuning in. Your engagement and curiosity drive us to keep exploring the critical topics that shape our transit system. Remember to subscribe to Spilling the Tea on your favorite podcast platforms and join us next time for more behind-the-scenes insights into the MBTA. If you have any questions or ideas for future episodes, don't hesitate to reach out. We love hearing from you and incorporating your perspectives into our discussions. You can contact us at social@mbta.com. I'm Andrew Cassidy, and this has been Spilling the Tea.